The air on the hangar deck of the carrier Vigilance was a stratified mix of cold, cycled oxygen, hot metal, and the sharp temps of ion drive coolant. It was a world of gray steel and amber warning lights, a place of function over form, and it was the only world Anya Petrova had known for 3 years. She was a ghost in this machine, a small figure in a grease-stained maintenance jumpsuit, her face usually smudged with carbon, her hands calloused and capable. She moved with a quiet efficiency that made her almost invisible, a trait she had, long ago, learned to cultivate. Her silence was often mistaken for simplicity, her humility for a lack of ambition. This was a profound miscalculation. Within Anya's chest beat the heart of a hawk, a heart that longed for the cold, silent freedom of the void, for the violent ballet of a viper in combat. Today, that heart was about to be laid bare on the altar of institutional arrogance. Commander Jorik, leader of the ship's prestigious Scimitar Squadron, stood before the assembled pilots and senior crew. He was a man carved from privilege, his flight suit pristine, his jaw set in a permanent sneer of superiority. He held up a data slate, its surface marred by a greasy thumbprint. A ripple of condescending laughter spread through the pilots. "Have an aspirant among us," Jorik announced, his voice dripping with theatrical amusement. "It seems our maintenance tech, third-class Petrova, believes that fixing Vipers is the same as flying them." He turned his gaze, cold and dismissive, toward Anya, who stood near the back, her expression unreadable. "Tell us, Petrova," he boomed. "What makes you think you have the right stuff? Is it because you can change a plasma conduit without reading the manual?" More laughter, sharper this time. Anya's gaze did not waver. She stood with a quiet dignity that seemed to infuriate Jorik even more. She had submitted her application for the pilot program, a long shot, a dream she had nurtured in the silent, lonely hours after her shifts. She had known it would be difficult, but she had not anticipated this level of public ridicule. "The sky," Jorik continued, stepping closer to her, invading her space, "is not for grounders. It is for those with pedigree, with training, with a legacy. It is not a place for wishful-thinking grease monkeys." He tossed the data slate onto the deck at her feet, a gesture of ultimate contempt. "Stick to your wrenches. It's what you're good for." The finality in his tone echoed through the cavernous bay. The pilots, his sycophants and cronies, smirked in agreement. They saw only what he wanted them to see, a lowly mechanic getting put in her place. They did not see the fire. In Anya's eyes, a fire she banked carefully, hiding its heat behind a stoic mask. She bent down, slowly and deliberately, and picked up the slate. She didn't wipe the grease from it. It was a part of her, a testament to her work. Without a word, she turned and walked away, the sound of her worn boots on the metal grating the only sign of her retreat. But it wasn't a retreat. It was a promise. She found solace in her work, her hand speaking a language the Vipers understood. She could feel the subtle vibrations of a misaligned thruster, hear the faint electronic whine of a failing power cell. The pilots flew them, but Anya knew their souls. Her only ally was a grizzled old deck chief named Sal, a man who had seen generations of arrogant pilots and quiet workers come and go. He never said much, but he would sometimes leave a thermos of hot coffee for her near the simulator bay, a silent acknowledgement of her late-night sessions. In those simulators, under an anonymous call sign, Anya was not a mechanic. She was a legend. She flew with an instinct that couldn't be taught, her maneuvers fluid, unpredictable, and lethally effective. She broke records set by Jorik himself. Her ghost pilot a source of intense speculation and frustration among the squadron. The system saw her as a number. Jorik saw her as an object of scorn. But in the simulated starlight, she was free. Weeks turned into months. And the Cold War with the mysterious Outer Rim marauders known as the Corsairs grew hotter. Skirmishes became battles. The Vigilance saw more and more combat, and the hangar deck became a triage ward for battered Vipers. Scimitar Squadron, under Jorik's rigid by-the-book command, was taking losses. His strategies were predictable, textbook, maneuvers that the cunning Corsairs had learned to anticipate and exploit. Jorik, incapable of self-reflection, blamed his pilots, his machines, the very fabric of space itself. He never once considered that his own arrogance was the fleet's greatest liability. Colonel Eva Rostova, the ship's commander, watched the mounting casualty reports from the quiet isolation of the bridge. She was a veteran of the brutal outer colony wars, a conflict that had forged her into a leader who valued results over rhetoric. She saw the patterns Jorik missed, the fatal lack of imagination in his tactics. Her face etched with the lines of command, and a deep, weary sorrow often lingered on the tactical displays, searching for an answer she couldn't find. Down in the hangar, Anya worked with a feverish intensity. She patched up the ships, her hands moving with a surgeon's precision. She poured her frustration and her hope into the metal, treating each Viper as a living thing. Her private project, however, was hidden away in a decommissioned section of the bay. It was Viper 7, a ship officially listed as scrap, its frame too damaged in a past conflict for official repair. But Anya saw potential. She saw a warrior spirit waiting to be reawakened. After her shifts, while the rest of the crew slept, she would work on Viper 7, rerouting power conduits, reinforcing the frame with scavenged parts, and fine-tuning its engine until it hummed with a quiet, dangerous energy. It was her secret, her vessel of defiance. Sal knew, of course. He would often find reasons to divert patrols away from her section, covering for her with a gruff nod. "That old bird has more heart than half the shiny new models on this deck," he'd once grumbled to her. "Takes a certain kind of person to see it." Anya had only smiled, a rare and fleeting expression, before turning back to her work. The tension on the Vigilance was becoming unbearable. A major Corsair offensive was rumored to be imminent. The pilots grew tense, their bravado cracking at the edges. Jorik responded by doubling down on his harsh discipline, his voice a constant grating presence over the comms. During one particularly brutal debriefing, after a mission where 2 more pilots were lost, he once again singled out the maintenance crews for blame. "If our ships were properly maintained," he snarled, his eyes sweeping over Anya, "my pilots would have the edge they need." It was a lie, a desperate attempt to deflect from his own failings. Anya stood her ground, her silence a wall against his fury. She knew the truth. She had seen the battle logs. The pilots had been outflown, pure and simple. That night, she put the finishing touches on Viper 7. Its systems glowed a healthy green. Its canopy was polished to a mirror shine. It was more than a machine. It was her conviction made manifest. As she ran her hand along its fuselage, she felt a thrum of power, a connection that went beyond mere mechanics. It was ready. And so was she. The storm was coming, and she would be ready too. Fly into its heart. The attack came not like thunder, but like the silent, tearing rip of reality itself. One moment the Vigilance was cruising through the inky blackness. The next, alarms screamed a symphony of pure chaos. Proximity alerts wailed as a fleet of Corsair ships warped in, their positions perfectly calculated for a devastating alpha strike. Explosions rocked the carrier, and the lights flickered, plunging the bridge into a hellish twilight of red emergency lighting. "Report." Colonel Rostova's voice cut through the panic, steady and sharp as a shard of ice. Her crew, though shaken, responded with practiced efficiency. "Multiple hull breaches on decks 4 and 7. Aft shields are down to 12%. They've bypassed our outer picket." The reports were a cascade of disaster. On the hangar deck, it was pandemonium. A direct hit had buckled a section of the launch bay, turning several brand-new Vipers into twisted, burning pyres. Pilots scrambled for their ships, the air thick with smoke and the smell of ozone. Jorik, his face pale, was shouting orders that were lost in the din. "Get Scimitar Squadron in the air, now. Form Delta formation on my mark." But his elite squadron was in disarray. Some were trapped by debris. Others watched in horror as their designated Vipers burned. A secondary explosion sent a wave of shrapnel across the deck, and Jorik cried out, clutching his arm as blood blossomed through his flight suit. His command Viper was now little more than a mangled wreck. He stared at the carnage, his arrogance finally cracking, replaced by the stark, wide-eyed face of fear. On the bridge, Rostova watched the tactical display with growing dread. The red icons of the Corsair fleet swarmed her crippled ship. Her pilots, those who managed to launch, were being picked off one by one, their rigid, predictable formations no match for the enemy's fluid, predatory tactics. "Shields are failing, Colonel," her tactical officer said, his voice grim. "Can't withstand another barrage. Retreat." The thought was bile in her throat, but it was the only logical option left. Her finger hovered over the command to order a full emergency warp, a move that would save the ship, but cede the entire sector to the enemy. It was in that moment of utter desperation that a new alert flashed on her screen. An unauthorized launch sequence. From the decommissioned bay. "Who is that?" Rostova demanded. "All squadrons are accounted for or destroyed." Down on the chaotic hangar deck, a new sound cut through the noise. It was the deep, resonant hum of a Viper's turbine spooling up, a sound of pure, contained power. All eyes turned toward the shadowed corner where Viper 7, the ship long condemned as scrap, now sat bathed in the glow of its own cockpit lights. At the controls was Anya Petrova. She had shed her greasy jumpsuit. She wore a simple, unadorned flight suit she had pieced together herself. Her face, illuminated by the console, was a mask of serene focus. Jorik, cradling his injured arm, stumbled. Toward her, his face a mess of disbelief and rage. "Petrova, what in the hell do you think you're doing?" "Get out of that cockpit. That is an order." Anya did not even turn to look at him. Her hands moved over the controls with an economy and grace that spoke of thousands of hours of practice. The launch cradle began to move, positioning Viper 7 for takeoff. "Did you hear me? I will have you court-martialed." Jorik screamed, his voice cracking. Sal, the deck chief, stood between Jorik and the Viper, his arms crossed. "I think you should." "Stand back, Commander," he said, his voice a low rumble. On the bridge, the comms officer patched in the hangar's visual feed. The camera zoomed in on the rogue pilot's cockpit. Rostova leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. She saw the quiet determination on the young woman's face. And then she saw it. As Anya's hand tightened on the flight stick, her sleeve slid back just an inch. On her forearm was a tattoo, a stark black design of a stylized scythe, crossed with a lightning bolt. Time seemed to stop for Colonel Rostova. The chaos of the bridge faded into a dull roar. She knew that symbol, and it was the insignia of the legendary Scythe Squadron, a black ops unit from the Outer Colony Wars known for their impossible victories and their terrifyingly brilliant. A man who had died a hero's death years ago. A man named Viktor Petrova. "My God," Rostova whispered, her voice choked with sudden, stunning realization. "It's Viktor's girl." The tactical officer looked at her, confused. "Colonel." Eyes now blazing with a desperate, wild hope were locked on the screen. "Patch me through to the hangar." Now, her voice boomed over the hangar comes, silencing Jorik's sputtering protests. "Deck chief, clear a path." "Let her fly." The hangar doors groaned open, revealing a maelstrom of weapon fire and the cold, star-dusted canvas of the void. Viper 7 did not hesitate. With a roar that seemed to shake the very soul of the Vigilance, Anya launched her resurrected machine. Into the heart of the battle, what followed was not a fight. It was a performance. It was a brutal, beautiful dance of death that left everyone who witnessed it speechless. The surviving scimitar pilots, accustomed to Jorik's rigid, predictable formations, watched in stunned awe. Anya didn't fly in straight lines or perfect arcs. She moved like a force of nature, a whirlwind of metal and fire. Viper tumbled and spun, using vectors and thrust combinations the Academy simulators would have flagged as catastrophic system failures. She used the enemy's own fire as cover, dodging behind one Corsair to blast another, using their own wreckage as a shield. It was the flying style of a ghost, a legend whispered about in old war stories. It was the style of the Scythe Squadron. Where did she learn to fly like that? One of the pilots stammered over the open channel, his voice filled with disbelief. On the bridge, The tactical display, once a map of their impending doom, began to change. One by one, the red Corsair icons began to blink out, extinguished by the single, anonymous blue icon that was Anya. She wasn't just defending, she was hunting. She identified the Corsair command ship, a vessel twice her size, and flew directly at it, weathering a storm of defensive fire that should have vaporized her. At the last possible second, she executed an impossible maneuver, flip and burn that sent her screaming past its bridge, her cannons unleashing a precise, devastating burst that crippled its communication and command systems. The Corsair fleet, now leaderless and thrown into confusion, began to break apart. Their aggressive swarm became a panicked retreat. Anya, her Viper battered and scarred, pursued them for a moment longer, a lone guardian, ensuring the threat was truly gone before turning back toward the wounded Vigilance. Silence reigned in the hangar bay. Fires had been extinguished. The wounded were being tended to. Jorik sat on a crate, his injured arm forgotten, his face a mask of shattered pride and utter incomprehension. The remaining pilots stood in, a silent group, their helmets off, their eyes fixed on the hangar doors. When Viper 7 landed, it was not with the crisp precision of a parade ground landing, but with the weary grace of a warrior returning from a desperate war. The landing gear groaned, and sparks showered from a damaged thruster. The canopy hissed open, and Anya Petrova, her face streaked with sweat, looked out over the deck. No one moved. No one spoke. The scorn and mockery were gone, replaced by a profound, reverent awe. She had been the invisible girl, the grease monkey, the object of their ridicule. Now, she was their savior. The ramp to the bridge descended, and Colonel Rostova walked onto the hangar deck alone. She strode past the silent pilots, past the humbled Commander Jorik, and stopped directly in front of Anya's Viper. She looked up at the young woman, her hard commander's face softened by an emotion no one had seen before. Anya, with a quiet dignity, unstrapped herself and climbed down from the cockpit. She stood before the colonel, ready to accept her court-martial, her punishment for defying every rule. Rostova simply looked at her, her eyes tracing the lines of a face she now realized she had seen before in a faded photograph on a war hero's desk. "Your father," Rostova said, her voice thick with emotion but carrying across the silent deck, "was the bravest pilot I ever knew. He would be so proud." Anya's stoic mask finally broke. A single tear traced a clean path through the grime on her cheek. She looked the colonel in the eye, and for the first time, her voice was not quiet or hesitant. It was clear and strong. "I just did my job, Colonel." From that day on, everything changed on the Vigilance. The culture of privilege was shattered, replaced by a new respect for talent, no matter its origin. Commander Jorik was reassigned to a desk job on a remote outpost, his career over. Anya Petrova was not just given a pilot's commission. She was asked to rebuild the squadron, to teach them what she knew. The Scimitar Squadron was reborn as the Scythe Squadron, and its emblem, the symbol of a father's legacy and a daughter's triumph, became a beacon of hope throughout the fleet, a lasting reminder that true worth is not found in a name or a rank, but in the fire of a courageous heart.